Our first panel, Ron Boltz representing the Pennsylvania Liberty Alliance and Jim Rodkey, the Pennsylvania Property Rights Association. Welcome, gentlemen. Please begin.
Hello, my name is Ron Boltz. The majority of Pennsylvania citizens have been speaking for well over a decade, and their opinion of the school property tax couldn't be more clear. They want it eliminated, not temporarily reduced, not temporarily frozen, but eliminated. The proof of this continues to pile up. The Pennsylvania Liberty Alliance recently delivered over 30,000 petitions to Governor Wolf signed by Pennsylvania homeowners who wish to see the complete elimination of the school property tax. In 2017, Pennsylvania voters passed a constitutional amendment to allow up to a 100% property tax exclusion for primary residences, which resulted in 84% of our counties saying yes, with an average vote split being 60-40. An FNM poll released just this month also backs this up, stating 61% of registered voters in Pennsylvania believe that the state's tax system needs a fundamental overhaul, and 60% believe that property taxes should be replaced by broader statewide taxes. So the question is, if everybody knows the property tax is so unfair, so regressive, and so hated, why are we still here talking about it? The answer to that question is quite simply, and unfortunately, politics, special interest opposition, and the fear of change. Two of the biggest talking points we hear in defense of the property tax are that it's a stable source of revenue and that it provides local control. On their face, these talking points may sound reasonable, but when examining them in closer detail and with all of the facts being considered, we see a very different story. The main argument against shifting to an income tax or sale tax are that these sources are too unstable and that revenue can go down during economic downturns. While this may be true, the opposite is also true. Revenue goes up during good economic times, and in fact, time spent in positive territory is much, much greater than the time spent in the red, which is very little. An IFO report issued to Representatives Pashinsky and Sterla last year confirms this, as it shows the overall rate increase of PIT revenue from 2004 to 2018, keeping pace with the property tax revenue rate increases during the same time period. For anyone who doubts that we can fund our schools with these two sources, please consider this. The personal income tax rate has been raised only one time over the past 27 years, and the sales tax has remained the same since 1968. Yet our state budgets have grown dramatically over that time period. As for the single PIT increase that we've seen over the last 27 years, it was a relatively small 0.12 percentage points. Compare that to the property tax rate increases that we have seen over the past 3 decades, and it becomes a very difficult argument indeed to say that the PIT and the SUT are not stable enough to fund our schools. If these sources can fund our state and taxpayers must live with economic realities, why then do some say that the institutions that educate our children do not have the ability to manage their budgets the same way? The last point I'd like to make about the supposed stability of the property tax is that it does not consider that schools spend time and money chasing delinquent taxes, fighting assessment appeals, and dealing with the loss of revenue when businesses leave or turn to nonprofit tax-exempt status, like we're seeing many of our hospitals doing now. Above all else, this argument does not consider the instability that this creates for the tax-paying homeowner, as their taxes keep going up to make up for losses elsewhere. For the simple misfortune of not being able to pay his tax, we kick families out of their homes. They're treated like hard criminals, while those who actually do commit hard crimes often realize a much lesser punishment. The other argument about local control is equally as flawed. As a former school board member myself, I have seen the supposed local control firsthand, from the thousands of pages of regulations to the unfunded mandates to the pension issue. I can tell you that local control is largely a myth. The wife of my colleague who will be speaking right after me said it best. Local control really means controlling the locals, as Harrisburg decides what the local districts must do with their local revenue, while at the same time avoiding accountability for making those demands. We often hear that we need to address the cost drivers before we eliminate property taxes, but the opposite is in fact true. We currently have a system where many of the biggest cost drivers, such as the pension, are controlled by Harrisburg, but paid for in a large part by local revenue. If we expect politically difficult changes to the cost drivers, while those who need to make these changes can continue to pass the buck to the local school boards and local taxpayers, we're going to be waiting a very long time. We're reaching a breaking point, and Pennsylvania taxpayers are becoming more and more frustrated. All of the so-called solutions that have been tried or offered up to this point have not and will not fix the problem. The promise of legalized gambling to fixing our property tax problems has failed miserably and has left Pennsylvanians even more skeptical of their state government. More frequent countywide reassessments are certainly not the answer, as they fix none of the inequities, none of the unfairness, and the cost drivers associated with the current system remain in place. In fact, many members of my organization have done studies around the state using real data in counties that did local countywide reassessments. We found that the assessments were just as inaccurate after the reassessment as they were before, and taxpayers had to pay millions of dollars to achieve essentially nothing. During these studies, we also looked at property tax payments as a percentage of mortgage payments. For example, in Upper Darby, we found that the lowest valued homes would have a property tax payment twice that of the mortgage payment. This is not unique to this area, but rather occurs in many other areas across the state, driving down home values and making home ownership more and more difficult. We also found the highest millage rates often occur where incomes are the lowest. No wonder why so many people are trapped into a lifetime of renting. Simply increasing the state's share of public education funding is not the answer either. We often hear that the state contributes less as a percentage than other states, and some legislators point to increasing the state's share while not eliminating the property tax as the solution. It is not. Historically, the state has increased funding almost every year, but yet the property tax always continued to climb at a higher rate. The high rate of property tax increases is one reason why the state's share appears low by comparison, but according to 2016 census data, Pennsylvania is ranked 7th in overall per pupil spending. The bottom line is that total and permanent elimination is the only answer. Reassessments have not fixed the problem, reduction schemes have not and will not fix the problem, and none of the unfairness or inequities would be addressed with either of these ideas. Doing so-called targeted relief for only certain people will only shrink the tax base and put even more burden on our working families. We hear ideas of eliminating or freezing for seniors only, but that would be absolutely devastating to the rest of the homeowners who are already struggling and would see enormous increases to their tax burdens to make up for it, not to mention even larger increases going forward, further compounding the problem. It's time to eliminate the property tax and treat all property taxpayers equitably and eventually all children equitably. The very reason we have such inequities in school funding is because of the property tax system. I sincerely hope that the school lobby groups who have been so reluctant to change finally realize that the inequities our schools face were created by the current property tax system. No new funding formulas and no adjustments to state revenue will ever fix this. When weighing out the pros and cons of eliminating the school property tax, it's abundantly clear that the pros far outweigh the cons. It's long past due for Harrisburg to catch up to where taxpayers have been on this issue literally for decades. We currently have several elimination plans to look at. All have their pluses and minuses, which we can and should discuss. But while we compare different ideas to each other, let's be sure we also compare each idea to the status quo, which is irreparably broken. I'd like to thank Senator Kristen Phillips Hill for hosting this workshop in her district, and thank you to all the legislators who continue to push this rock up the hill. Thank you.
My name is Jim Rodkey, and I'm with the Pennsylvania Property Rights Association. I brought our Constitution along. Our Constitution in Article 1, Section 1 provides for the protection of property in Pennsylvania. It states plainly that all men are born equally free and independent and have certain inherent and indefeasible rights, among which are those of enjoying and defending life and liberty, of acquiring, possessing, and protecting property and reputation, and of pursuing their own happiness. Section 10 of Article 1 goes on. It says, "Nor shall private property be taken or applied to public use without authority of law and without just compensation first being made or secured." I'm here today because I believe the property tax to be the most morally irresponsible, regressive, and unfair system of taxation in existence. Regardless of the strides that have been made in our society in the name of justice and progress, here we are still clinging to a system of taxation that is rooted in European feudal systems of serfs and serfdoms. That may sound harsh, but that's where we are. It is a system where the actual property owner never really owns their home and is simply renting the right to stay in that home from a government who views that home only as a taxable commodity And if an individual can't keep up with those demands, out they go to be replaced by someone who can. It is a system of taxation where we accept an arbitrarily determined assessed value of a home as an actual worth for the purpose of taxation, even if that assessed value does not reflect the fair market value of that home. And the cold hard truth of the matter is that this has been studied. The assessed value of the home will rarely reflect the actual value of fair market homes. It is a system where it is estimated that as many as 64% of properties are over-assessed. For that portion of the population, they are paying property taxes on property they do not physically own. For the rest, they aren't paying property taxes on property they do own. And yet there are those who have the audacity to continue to call this type of taxation fair. When you can't keep up with the tax, out you go. The consideration of just compensation for a lifetime of investment in that home is not even a part of this process. There is no due process. You are removed from your home. It is sold on auction, most often without consideration, with just compensation, where homes are sold for pennies on the dollar. And we call this fair. Following the economic recession of 2007 and 2008, when home values plummeted, did assessed values of those homes drop anywhere in Pennsylvania? Was there anything in place to protect the property owner during this very, very difficult economic time? You know, many of us are only one lifetime event away from losing our homes because it's not based on ability to pay. Another recession, a tragic health incident, temporary job loss, the death of a spouse, where we may actually be able to keep up with the mortgage or actually be in a position where that home is actually paid for in full, but the ever-increasing property tax bill keeps coming, and every year they come at a higher and higher rate, so that many face the inevitable day of losing that home. And when it finally comes, all because we think we should fund something so important as education on a system that is not based on ability to pay. At the current rate of growth, in less than 20 years, the property tax burden in this Commonwealth will double, based on projections from the Independent Fiscal Office. In another 10 years, it will triple if we continue down this path. And yet we are told this is stability, that it's fair, and worst of all, in my opinion, that it is somehow just. I don't simply despise the property tax because of the financial burden it places on so many people. I despise the property tax because it is morally reprehensible to me that we would continue to shackle ourselves to this regressive and egregious system of taxation and funding education. The house that my wife and I call our home has been in existence since the mid-1800s. During that entire time, it has been taxed and taxed and taxed again. Our homes are the only things that are taxed and taxed until the tax actually exceeds the actual worth of the thing being taxed. And again, somehow we keep clinging to this notion that this is fair. I do believe that education is important, but I just don't see how clinging to this system will benefit our schools in the long run. I believe we are on an unsustainable path, one that is putting the future of education of our children at risk, threatening the future job security for those in education. We must stop looking at the here and now and start looking down the road to the future to see where this path we are on will lead us. I am encouraged by the formation of this work group. I do want to see this issue resolved, starting with the complete elimination of all school property taxes once and for all, in a way that is as fair to everyone as is humanly possible. It needs to be fair to working families, retirees, the business community, and non-property owners, and I know that's not an easy task. It needs to be fair to education funding, providing them with the revenue they need. That being said, fair is not providing 100% elimination to some by making everyone else pay for it. We are all going to have some skin in this game. I do not want my property taxes eliminated by making my children, my grandchildren, and future great-grandchildren pick up my share of the responsibility in education funding. Because, as I said, education is important, and I believe it's everyone's responsibility to provide for that education. This is going to mean sitting down and listening to the valid concerns related to solving this problem, and there are valid concerns that shouldn't be dismissed or diminished by demonizing those who state their very valid concerns. We can do this respectfully in a spirit of decorum. What's at stake is far too important to be sidetracked by that sort of rhetoric. Obviously, the my way or the highway approach isn't helping. None of us, as an individual, has the complete solution to this problem. But working together, I contend, we are smart enough in Pennsylvania to do this because deep down inside, I truly believe the majority of us already knows this is the right thing to do. Having worked with some of you already, I know that there are those in the General Assembly that have the economic knowledge, the tax background, and the moral integrity to do this, and it's going to take all of that and more to get it done. So let's have that discussion, let's get to the solution, and then let's finally make this happen for a better future for us, for our families, our communities, and for future generations.
Thank you, gentlemen, for your input, and especially for thank you for obeying our request for the time requirements. That's always the most difficult part of keeping these panels going. How do we coalesce around one bill? There's 5, 6, 10, 15 floating around out there. Ron, Jim, you'd indicated, you saw, I think, a preference, and you didn't go into great detail, so why don't I throw it to you as to why your members have said this is the answer, not this one or this one or this one.
Well, as I stated in my remarks, members of my organization feel that the evidence of the past attempts to reduce through casino gambling revenue and so forth have proven to fail. They're proven failures. Simply put, if we reduce the property tax but don't eliminate it, we fear it's just going to continue to go up. We're going to be paying extra taxes for that temporary reduction, and we're going to soon find ourselves we're not solving anything with a reduction plan is our fear. And in fact, may even be making things quite worse. The targeted relief that I keep hearing about, anytime we shrink the tax base and we put more burden on our working families, I think this is counterproductive. Many working families, not just seniors that have a problem with this issue. Working families struggle as well. They get kicked out of their homes as well too. If we're going to talk about 30%, give or take, of the revenue for property taxes being put forward, being paid by seniors, somebody else has to make that up. So if we're already having struggling working class families, adding an extra 25-30% to their tax burden by shrinking the tax base for targeted relief, that's just going to compound the problems going forward. And keep in mind that every increase also going forward is going to be that much larger as well to sustain the schools. We believe shrinking the tax base is absolutely the wrong way to go. We need to do the opposite and expand the tax base.
If I could add, I don't know that either Ron or myself is here to advocate for a bill number. We're here to advocate for a concept, and the concept is the complete and total elimination of the school property tax. How we get there is going to be important. It's going to be very important, but we have to have the discussions to get there. And I agree with very much of what's been said here. There are valid concerns all the way around. We have to make sure that our school districts are being funded, but we also have to worry about what's happening to the economy of the state, because it is, and as Ron said, this is not just a senior problem. And it breaks my heart. I have been around this state looking with the town halls, talking to people, and the number of people that I've met through this, but it isn't just seniors. And it's devastating. My own neighbor, person who lives beside me, was 30 years old, found himself in a place during the recession where he could not keep up with the property taxes, went into bankruptcy, and eventually wound up in the middle of the night just walking away from his house because it was more economically feasible for him and his family. He was 30 years old when he did this. This is a problem that is impacting. I live in a third-class city, and I can drive through my town and I see the boarded-up windows. I see the overcrowding in apartments because it does impact rent. The problem with the property tax is it's not just the property tax. The property tax increases the cost of every good and every services. We tax the land of the farmer who grows the wheat. We tax the bakeries that bake the wheat and turn it into bread. We tax the shipping companies that ship the wheat. And then we tax the retailers that sell the wheat. And then we say, why does bread cost so much money? It's in everything that we do. We're taxing the buildings, that the legal services. The building isn't making any money. We have more than enough empty buildings in this state to prove that that's not generating property tax revenue. What's generating property tax revenue is the business model of the people inside that and the people who live in these homes. And we got to stop looking at this as a building. And we have to start looking, this is people that we're affecting. We have an out-migration problem in this state. The majority of that out-migration is working class. What are we going to do? We're shifting this. Every working family that leaves this state looking for a friendlier tax environment is taking PIT or any income revenue from the state, and they're spending their sales tax money in another state, not here. And if we don't respect the business community, I mean, how do we attract businesses in this state unless we propose tax incentives, KOZs, LERTAs, all of these things that we put in place because we already know the property tax is a problem. We know it. We've been looking at this and putting Band-Aids on this for a long time, far too long. And it's time just to say the Band-Aids are done. Let's put on the tourniquet and let's amputate the beast. It's long past time for us to do this. This is an extremely immoral system of taxation that is the most regressive system of taxation. So yes, I am in support of a concept. I've worked with Representative Ryan on this new bill. I've advocated for 76. I want a solution. That's what I want. And I'm willing to sit down and talk to anybody because I honestly do believe we have valid concerns all the way around. Let's get down and let's stop this pro and con. Property taxes are horrendous. And we should have long ago moved away from this form of taxation. It is extremely regressive, extremely unfair, and I do firmly believe that we're smart enough in Pennsylvania to figure out a solution to this problem, that we can sit down together in the same room, recognize the problems of both sides on this argument to come to a solution that works for all of Pennsylvania. That being said, I support complete elimination. That's all I support.
Mr. Chairman, can I
Sure.
ask something real quick? I'll be brief. One of the things that I left out because of my time restraint in my opening remarks was this winners and losers thing that we always constantly hear, and we heard it again today, and really quickly. That's one of the reasons why also we propose and support only total elimination, because we don't believe any other system is going to fix the current system, which is really where the winners and losers are created. We don't view property tax elimination as creating new winners and losers, even though we constantly hear it. We consider the property tax system, the creation of those winners and losers, and eliminating that tax as the solution, because every single taxpayer under many of these proposals would be treated exactly the same way. Everybody pays the same PIT, everybody pays the same sales tax. That's fixing the winners and losers scenario that we currently have. And to address the some people will pay more, I have an IFO report here actually issued to Representative Ryan that proves unquestionably that there will be more quote-unquote winners than losers financially, but I'd like to actually use Mr. Burkhart's own examples of his residents in his district paying 3.75 to 4.6% of their income towards their school property taxes. And in Mr. Scavello's neighborhood, we were up and doing a town hall up there. We had a single mother who was paying 14% of her income just towards her school property taxes. 3.75 to 4.6% of income is a lot more than most of the proposals that, well, pretty much than all of the proposals that we've been hearing about today. So there will be by far more quote unquote financial winners, at least we're talking about homeowners here, than there would be losers. We don't believe any other system would result in such good numbers that way. And again, we do have, this isn't just my opinion, we do have actual solid numbers from the fiscal office to back up what I'm saying. Thank you.
So if I could just make a couple of comments, and not talking about any one particular bill. In my decades of doing turnarounds of financially troubled companies, I have never in my life seen a more complicated, intricate problem than what we are trying to tackle here today. If we don't have a shared risk in resolving this problem, I guarantee you we will be having the same discussion 5 years from now, excuse me. So let me give you a couple ideas what it is. First and foremost, I'm on the board of directors of PAPRA. I've been on there since June. I'm a CPA and I'm a financial matters expert with the Securities and Exchange Commission. And that's from a poor inner city kid in Baltimore, Maryland. Some things you want to be aware of. In 2001 to 2002 school year, the total employer contribution was 1.09% of payroll. In the school year 2019-2020, it's 34.29%. Let me say that again. 34% of every payroll dollar goes to take care of pension-related costs, of which about 75% are from prior service costs. I made a comment to Senator Argyle, who's been a dear friend for decades. And my comment was this basically. Decisions that were made well before anyone was in this chamber, the legislature, or the Senate, decisions were made that we are paying for today. We can either put our head in the sand or not do anything about it, and it will collapse. And that's why I want to bring it up. Dr. Strom, you made a comment that it's going up to 36.3%. That's assuming we have no recession. If we have a recession, you're looking at 45% of your payroll. I do bankruptcy for a living. The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania is very close to not being able to be pulled out of the brink of bankruptcy. I would never design a bill like I have had to design if I thought there was a remote possibility we could save this Commonwealth. Dr. Strom, the comment I want to bring up to you, and with all that as background material that I want to ask, I met with your representatives, I met with AARP, I met with PSEA, I met with realtors, I met with approximately 150, Sam, you were willing to talk to me. One of the comments that was said is that revenue equals expense. And one of my major concerns is that's the problem with government. Revenue doesn't equal expense because my revenue changes, their revenue changes, and I guarantee you their revenue changes. If I can't make my bill payments, I cut my spending. The IDEA Act that you heard about was Senator Kristen Phillips Hill and myself and other members of the House of Representatives. No one would run my resolution in the Pennsylvania House, so I was asked to go out and get the letter signed, sarcastically thinking, how would a by the way, a 68-year-old freshman ought to really scare you. But how could a freshman get signatures? I came back later and I asked the person sitting next to the chair who wouldn't run my resolution, I said, would you sign it? And she said, what would he do? Did he sign it? I said, no. So then the chairperson looked at me and said, how many signatures do you have? And I said, I have 120. And he said, you've gotten 120 signatures. I said, I'm talking to every member, and I want to thank you for doing this because I now know every member of the Pennsylvania General Assembly. We ended up with 165 signatures. Then I got in a car, drove down to Washington, D.C., as Colonel Mastriano would want me to do, and sat down with senators from the Pennsylvania, representatives from the Pennsylvania delegation, and said, this is unfair, it's a cost driver, but here's my fear. As I've seen happen with the issue with the casinos, if we get you that relief, and I believe we're going to get you that relief, that will save you about 6 to 7% of your budget, and my fear is it will be spent on something else.
Exactly.
I need your help to know that we're going to get this beast under control, because I guarantee you I'm doing it on the PAPRA side.